state of Utah on penalty of perjury that the testimony given in this matter today will be true and correct, so help you God?
Yes.
Please have a seat up there. You having testified before, keep in mind those past admonitions about verbal responses as well. Thank you. Mr. Pomeroy.
Thank you, Judge. Maybe this will make it go a little bit quicker. This witness produced 2 reports, Exhibits 98 and 99. I'd like to move to admit them now. I don't think there will be objection.
No objection. Right. Exhibits 98 and 99 are admitted without objection. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, thank you for being here. Would you please introduce yourself to the jury? Tell them your name, where you work.
Yes, so I'm Rachel Williams. I'm a forensic scientist at the Utah Bureau of Forensic Services, which is also known as the State Crime Lab.
Thank you very much. What would you like us to call you today? Ms. Williams, Rachel?
You can just call me Rachel.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you, Rachel. So you stated you worked at the Utah State Crime Lab, is that correct?
Yes.
As a forensic scientist?
Yes.
Is that the official job title?
It's called Forensic Scientist 2.
Okay. What degrees do you have?
So I have a bachelor's degree in biochemistry.
And did that coursework include education related to DNA analysis?
Yes.
And then after you received your degree, did you receive specialized training to perform your job?
Yes.
Can you just give a brief description to the jury of what that training is?
Yes, so I've attended multiple different forensic conferences, and then also I received on-the-job training. So I went through a in-depth training program that had required readings and presentations, written and oral examinations. I had to practice analyzing mock samples that were similar to casework samples. And then at the end of everything, I had to complete like a final test to show that I learned the skills necessary to do those disciplines.
And do you receive ongoing training as well?
Yes.
Are there ongoing proficiency tests as well?
Yes, so the DNA analysts, we have to take 2 proficiency tests per year.
And how long have you been working as a forensic scientist?
So I've worked there since September 2019, so about 6.5 years.
What are your day-to-day job duties?
So I am trained to do sample prep, so that's getting samples ready to be processed through the lab. I'm also trained to do DNA laboratory work, so that's taking the sample, running it through the lab to generate a DNA profile. And then I'm also trained in DNA profile interpretation, so that's where we are taking reference samples from the individuals and comparing those to evidence samples to make comparisons and calculate statistics.
And is the state lab accredited?
Yes.
And what does that mean to be accredited?
So accreditation means that the laboratory is meeting certain international and national standards, and accreditation provides confidence that the laboratory is producing quality results.
Great. So you work with DNA, essentially?
Yes.
Okay. And you had lots of education to get to the point where you're at?
Yes.
And DNA and statistical analysis sometimes includes some complex topics?
Yes.
Okay. So 2 things just to preface off these questions is first, I'd invite you to treat me like I'm 5 years old, right? Explain it in very simple concepts for us, if you could. 2, in the same way, it's okay to correct me. If I ask you a question that's dumb or wrong or just not the right words, just tell me I'm not asking the right question, okay?
Okay.
Is that fair?
Yes.
All right, so let's just start off. Explain what DNA is to the jury.
Yes, so DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. DNA is found inside your body, and you get half from your mother and half from your father. And your DNA profile is unique to you. And your body uses your DNA to determine how you look and how your body functions.
It's kind of like the blueprint for your body, right?
Yes.
And where in the body is DNA found?
So DNA is found inside of cells. So cells are like the building blocks that make up your body.
And that's this. Can DNA testing be used to compare DNA taken from an object to DNA taken from a person?
Yes.
Okay. So if I wanted to take DNA from an object for comparison purposes, how would I do that?
So typically the object can be submitted to the laboratory and we can swab that item. So we use, it's kind of like a Q-tip where it's a cotton swab. And then we'll rub that along the item to collect any potential DNA. And then from there, that swab will be run through the lab and we'll generate a DNA profile from that.
And I hope this isn't too dumb, but obviously when you swab an item, the DNA comes from where you swab, not from a place you didn't swab.
Yes.
So if you swabbed, for example, the front of an item and not the back, you'd be getting any DNA that was on the front of the item.
Yes.
But nothing from the back.
Yes.
Okay. So how is a DNA sample typically collected from a person?
So we have either a blood standard or a buccal standard that we'll use. So a blood standard is they'll draw the individual's blood and then they'll typically spot it on like a filter card, and then we'll take a cutting of that filter paper. And then a buccal standard is a swab taken from the inside of that individual's mouth.
So assume for a moment we've gotten some standards that we want to compare. Briefly explain how that DNA testing is performed at that point.
Yes, so the sample, we will cut part of that swab and put it into a tube. And then that tube, we will add chemicals to it that break cells open and release the DNA. Then we'll add some other chemicals that will clean the sample and get rid of any cellular debris and leave just the DNA behind. Once we have that DNA isolated, we'll do a step called quantitation. And the quantitation step will measure how much DNA, if any DNA is present. From there, we will do a step called amplification. And that's where we're creating millions of copies of that DNA and to get it to a detectable level. And then our last step is the separation and detection step. So that step separates the DNA fragments by their size, and it goes through an instrument where it gets detected, and then at the end we get a graph that is the DNA profile.
Okay. So the 4 steps were an extraction, breaking open the cells, getting the DNA, the quantitation, the measurement, the amplification, you're copying the DNA, and the separation and detective step, and that end result is a DNA profile.
Yes.
That graph that you referred to.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more what that means? What exactly is a DNA profile? What's the significance of that graph?
So on the graph, it has like an X and a Y axis, and then there will be different tall, skinny peaks that are detected. And so those peaks will be indicating which DNA was found. And so the DNA profile as a whole will have multiple different peaks at all of the different locations that we were testing. And then we can analyze that profile and see which DNA was detected, and see if it was a mixture, meaning it's DNA from multiple individuals, or if it's just a single source profile, meaning that there's only one individual's DNA detected.
Maybe to put that in simple terms, it sounds like a DNA profile is a visual representation of the DNA on an object.
Yes.
And you mentioned something about objects that may have DNA from one person or more than one person.
Is this one of your witnesses coming in?
No, Your Honor, that's just an attorney. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption there. We had that brief comment from you about potentially one person or multiple persons. So if you have an object that has DNA on it, but the DNA comes from more than one person, what's the outcome of these steps? Is it multiple profiles? Is it one profile that represents all the people? What do you get?
So that one particular swab will just have that one profile associated with it. So within that one profile, we're seeing multiple different peaks that indicate the DNA, and that would be a representation of all the people's DNA that contributed to that DNA mixture.
Is there a word to describe that type of profile?
So we call those mixtures.
Okay, so a single source profile would be when the profile only has one person in it.
Yes.
And a mixture is a profile that has multiple people, 2 or more.
Yes.
Let's talk about that statistical analysis briefly. How do you actually compare, once you have the profile, or profiles to compare, how do you see if there's a match or not? What are you doing in the statistical step?
So I analyze all of the evidence samples first, and then after I've analyzed those evidence crime scene samples, I will then compare them to any submitted reference samples from individuals. And from there, I will do a visual comparison to see if it looks like any of those reference profiles could be in that DNA mixture. If I cannot exclude that individual from the sample, then I will calculate a statistic called a likelihood ratio. And so this likelihood ratio is the statistic that compares two alternate propositions or explanations for that observed DNA profile. And so the likelihood ratio statistic will change its value depending on which propositions I'm comparing. And so, like for example, if I had a single source profile that was from one individual, I could potentially do like hypothesis 1 is that the person of interest contributed to the DNA profile versus hypothesis 2, an unknown, unrelated individual contributed to that DNA profile. So then from there, whichever one of those propositions is a better explanation for the DNA profile observed, the statistic will be higher in favor of that proposition versus the other.
When you have an object that has some DNA on it, and you test it, and you generate that profile, do you have to make any assumptions about that profile before completing that statistical analysis you just talked about?
Yes, so based on how that DNA profile works, based on how the DNA profile looks, I'm going to make my best assumption as to the number of individuals in that DNA mixture. So I look at the profile as a whole, and based on how many different peaks were detected in that profile, I'll make my best assumption as to if it's a 2-person mixture, 3-person mixture, 4-person mixture, or a single source, meaning it comes from one person.
Okay. And once you make that assumption and make a comparison, you describe the likelihood ratio, which is just the chances it's one proposition versus another.
Yes.
And the stronger the proposition is, the more likely it is that proposition 1 is that over proposition 2.
Yes.
And to clarify, a likelihood ratio doesn't tell the jury the probability a specific person handled an object, right?
Yes.
Okay. And it doesn't tell the jury when DNA was deposited.
Yes.
And it doesn't tell the jury how it was deposited.
Yes.
It simply compares two different explanations for the DNA that is on the object.
Yes.
So, as an example, I'm holding a pen in my hand. You could take this pen and do a swab and create a profile, right?
Yes.
And you could take a buckle standard for me and create a profile.
Yes.
And if you looked at the pen's profile and determined it was single source, great. Would maybe something you want to run in that case is the hypothetical 1, it's me, versus hypothetical 2, it's some random person in the population.
Yes.
And you could get very strong support or limited support or no support.
Yes.
Okay. Can you put diagram 1 up? For your reference, this is just an enlarged version of page 6 of Exhibit 98, which is your first report. Okay, do you recognize what this is when it comes up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, what is this?
So this is a verbal scale that can be used to help provide an explanation as to the weight of that likelihood ratio statistic. So based on the number of the likelihood ratio statistic, it can fall into the different categories, and those categories help explain the weight of that statistic.
Okay. And at each level, there's a word, a verbal qualifier that goes with it.
Yes.
Okay, so for example, if the likelihood ratio was 100,000, the verbal qualifier would be strong support.
Yes.
And if the ratio exceeded 1 million, there'd be very strong support.
Yes.
And I don't see other verbal qualifiers. You don't have a very, very, very strong support.
Yes.
But that being said, the bigger the number, the stronger the support.
Yes.
Okay. All right, we can take that down. Thank you. Lastly, before we turn to the test you did perform, does your lab have procedures to prevent contamination during DNA testing?
Yes.
Does that include the use of positive and negative controls?
Yes.
Okay. And those controls help verify the instrument and testing worked properly?
Yes.
And was that all followed in this case?
Yes.
And did you observe any indication of contamination at any point in the process?
No.
Now let's turn to the work you performed in this case. Thank you. Were you asked, what objects were you asked to test for DNA analysis?
Your Honor, would it be okay if I reference my report to get the name of those items?
Yeah, just look down, read through, refresh your memory, then put it down and look up and then testify to it. Thank you.
Would you like me to read all of the items or just the question samples?
Let me ask it this way. How many objects were submitted for testing?
6?
6, okay. Was one of them a gun?
Yes.
Was one of them a knife?
Yes.
Were the other 4 samples taken from 4 separate people?
Yes.
Who were those 4 people?
So the lab received standards from Matthew Restelli, Kevin Ellis, Tracey Grist, and Matthew Restelli.
Okay. Did you swab the gun and generate a DNA profile? Did someone in the lab swab the gun and create a DNA profile?
Yes.
Was that done for the knife as well?
Yes.
And then the standards from Mr. Restelli, Mr. Ellis, Ms. Restelli, and Ms. Grist, were DNA profiles created for each of them?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware that 3 of those persons, Mr. Ellis, Ms. Restelli, and Ms. Grist, are family members?
Yes.
Does that affect the testing that's done? Let me rephrase that.
Oh.
Does that affect the interpretation of the results of the testing?
So that's something that I take into consideration when I am doing my DNA interpretation because biological relatives share DNA. So like I mentioned earlier, you get half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father. So as I'm doing my DNA interpretation, that is something that I keep in mind while I'm analyzing those profiles.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that there's times where it doesn't really make much of a difference?
Yes.
But there are times where it really complicates the analysis?
Yes.
Okay. Let's start with the gun. What type of gun was swabbed?
So it was a Sig Sauer P365 9mm pistol.
Okay. And you already testified you produced a DNA profile. How many assumed contributors were on the gun?
There were 3 assumed contributors.
So the assumption based off what you saw was that 3 individuals' DNA were on the gun.
Yes.
And did you compare the DNA profiles of those 4 individuals to the profile found on the gun?
Yes.
Did you make any conclusions after running that comparison?
Yes, so I calculated likelihood ratio statistics based on those comparisons.
Okay. Please put up Exhibit 98, page 3, and it's this part right now. Yeah, that's fine right there. So we're talking about this second part. And we already talked about what very strong support for inclusion means in your lab, and moderate support, and limited support, and exclusion, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what was the likelihood ratio calculated for Mr. Ellis?
So the probability of observing the mixed DNA profile is approximately 4.3 times 10 to the 17 times more likely if it originated from Kevin Ellis and two unknown individuals than if it originated from 3 unknown individuals in the U.S. population, including the possibility of untested biological relatives of Kevin Ellis.
Okay. And we previously talked about the likelihood ratio cutoff for very strong support is 1 million, which is 1 times 10 to the 6.
Yes.
So this number is much bigger than that,
Yes.
indicating it really has very strong support.
Yes.
Okay. And again, what we're saying there is that it's very strong support that it was Mr. Ellis over some unknown person in the adult population or the U.S. population.
Yes.
Okay. What was the conclusion regarding Ms. Restelli?
So there was moderate support for exclusion for Catherine Restelli.
Okay. Inclusion means on it, exclusion means not on it.
I don't know if I can for sure say like they're on it, but like the statistic is providing support that they could be a contributor to that mixture.
Okay. What would be a plain English word for inclusion and exclusion in this case?
Exclusion is referring to like their DNA did not appear to be in that mixture, versus inclusion means those DNA variants looked like they could be in the mixture.
Okay, so stating that differently then, very strong support that Mr. Ellis's DNA was in the mixture, but moderate support that Ms. Restelli's DNA was not in the mixture.
Yes.
Okay. And then for Ms. Grist, what was the conclusion?
It was limited support for exclusion for Tracey Grist.
Okay. And then the conclusion for Mr. Restelli.
It was exclusion for Matthew Restelli.
Okay. And it doesn't say very strong support for exclusion. It says exclusion. What's the interpretation there?
So when it says just exclusion and it doesn't have a support for that, that means I didn't calculate a likelihood ratio statistic for that, because when I did my visual comparison, where I compared the reference samples to the evidence samples, it visually did not look like that individual's DNA was in the mixture. So I just did a flat out exclusion and didn't calculate a statistic for that.
Okay. We can take that down. Let's turn to the knife that you tested, or that was tested. What type of knife was swabbed?
So the knife was a Evatac camouflage folding pocket knife.
Okay. And again, a DNA profile was generated from the knife,
Yes.
and it was compared against the profiles for Matthew Restelli, Catherine Restelli, Kevin Ellis, and Tracey Grist.
Yes.
How many assumed contributors were detected on the knife?
4.
Okay. Again, that means we're assuming 4 individuals are present on the knife.
Yes.
And you documented the comparison of that mixture vis-a-vis the 4 named individuals we've been talking about.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a copy of Exhibit 98, which is your first report, file name, report 4? You have
Yes.
that with you? Okay. I believe it's on page 3 in the summary. Was there a conclusion about the likelihood of all 4 individuals being present in that DNA mixture together? And by all 4, I mean these 4.
You're referring to the summary section?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so the,
Yep, page 3. This one. Sorry, you may.
okay, yeah. So it says the DNA analysis provides support that Matthew Restelli, Catherine Restelli, Kevin Ellis, and Stacey Grist are possible contributors to the DNA mixture obtained from the swabs from, oh, oh, okay, sorry.
Can I approach the witness for
Was it the summary section?
The same information's in two places. That's the confusion. Yeah, she was, and it doesn't matter because it's the same information.
But you're looking
She's already at it. We'll just go.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm just following,
So you're in the summary section, and we were just noticing that the summary obviously reflects that that information appears twice. That's
Oh, okay.
perfectly fine. So for that comparison of the 4 individuals together, what was the final result or conclusion?
Though there is support for the combination inclusions of Matthew Restelli, Catherine Restelli, Kevin Ellis, or Tracey Grist, all 4 individuals cannot be present in the DNA mixture together.
Okay. So in plain English, that phrase that all 4 individuals cannot be present in the DNA mixture together, that just means all 4 are not on the knife together in the profile generated from the swab.
Yes.
Okay. Now, in addition to the analysis done in this report, you did an analysis in a second report, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we just talked about comparing the profile, assuming 4 people on the knife and we're looking at these 4 individuals all together versus 4 unknown persons.
Yes.
Okay. Did you also do an analysis with combinations of 3 people, 3 of these people plus an unknown person?
Yes.
Okay. Was there a result regarding the combination of Matthew, Kevin, and Catherine? You may need to turn to the other report, I understand.
Yeah. One sec. I'm sorry, which combination were you referring to?
Matthew, Kevin, and Catherine.
So though there is support for the individual inclusions of Catherine Restelli, Kevin Ellis, and Matthew Restelli to the mixed DNA profile, these individuals cannot be present in the mixture together.
Okay. And was there a combination test run of Matthew, Kevin, and Tracey?
Yes.
And what was the result of that one?
So though there is support for the individual inclusions of Kevin Ellis, Tracey Grist, and Matthew Restelli to the mixed DNA profile, these individuals cannot be present in the mixture together.
Okay. Again, trying to just put this into plain English terms. So far the results are those 4 people are excluded from being on the knife altogether at the same time.
Yes.
And then the combination of Matthew, Kevin, and Catherine is excluded.
Yes.
And then the combination of Matthew, Kevin, and Tracey is excluded.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we're going to go back to the first report that you did. Did you also run analyses for the combinations of 2 of the 4 individuals plus 2 unknown people?
Yes.
Okay. For what combinations of 2 of these known people, was there support, and what level of support was there? And would it help if we put that on the screen for everybody to help you discuss
Probably,
that?
yeah.
Okay. So that's going to be Exhibit 98, page 3. And it's going to be the top half of the screen. Scroll down slightly. Oh, slightly up. Right there. Thank you. Okay. For what combinations of 2 was there support, and what was the level of support?
Would you like me to?
And you can even just use that part at the top. That's
Okay,
fine.
yeah, that's. So there was very strong support for inclusion for the combination and Catherine Restelli with 2 unrelated individuals. There was very strong support for the combination of Matthew Restelli with Kevin Ellis with 2 individuals. And then there was also very strong support for inclusion for Matthew Restelli and Tracey Grist with 2 unknown unrelated individuals.
Each of those 3 combinations of 2 had very support. I'm looking at the rest of the report, and there's numbers attached. There's likelihood ratios attached, correct?
Yes.
And one of them is a number times 10 to the 17th, 1 times 10 to the 20th, 1 times 10 to the 17th. Those are very big numbers, right?
Yes.
But even still, can you say which of these 3 combinations is more likely than the other?
No, even though the 10 to the 20th is a bigger number than 10 to the 17th, it still falls within a very similar range, and it's still within that very strong support category. So just because that one is higher doesn't necessarily mean that that is the explanation for the DNA profile.
Okay. Could one possible reason for that be because those three individuals, Catherine, Kevin, and Tracey, are close family members?
Yes, so since they share DNA, because they're biologically related, in the DNA mixture, it could appear that one individual is in there because a different individual is in there, since they would have some of the same DNA fragments that we're looking at. So that can kind of influence the result that we're seeing with that statistic.
Okay. And to state this one last time in plain English, make sure we got this correct. There's very strong support for the notion that Matthew and one of these three individuals contributed to the DNA on the knife.
So the wording for the statistic is specifically that the probability of observing the DNA profile is more likely if it was the one option versus the other option.
But that's compared to unknown individuals,
Yes.
right? And each of these three standing alone is very strong compared to just unknown individuals.
Yes.
But trying to compare those three can't be done. The DNA analysis does not allow you to make a conclusion as to which of these three is most likely.
Sorry, could you rephrase that?
Yeah. So you ran a hypothesis of Matthew, Catherine against unknown. Matthew and Kevin versus unknown. Matthew and Tracey versus unknown. And
Yes.
each one with very strong support.
Yes.
But the DNA testing cannot say which of those three is the strongest idea or strongest hypothesis.
Yes.
No further questions, Judge.
Cross?
Williams, thank you for being here today. DNA is complicated, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it is very complicated. And, but it's become more and more popular as years go on. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's because the science is changing or improving as years go on.
Yes.
And, but DNA is not a perfect science, is it?
Yes.
It is a perfect science?
Oh, sorry. I thought you said it is not. Yes, it is not.
So, and an example, I've had my DNA tested. You know, I sent it to Ancestry or, I don't know, as a Christmas present. You know of those things, don't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So my whole family did it, you know, we sent their DNA in. And when I got my result, I was told, you know, what part of the world my DNA came from. You're familiar with this, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. And then, of course, I was also told who I was related to, right?
Yes.
And that's a popular use of DNA, isn't it?
Yes.
And I found out I was related to my son through DNA. Does that surprise you?
No.
No, that's natural, isn't it? He's my son. And I found that out through all my kids, and that's what a lot of people do, except instead of close siblings or children, they sort of reach out for family to see who might be related in some way. You've heard of this, haven't you?
Yes.
Yeah. So when I got my DNA result, I was told I was a certain percentage of Great Britain. I was a smaller percentage of like Germany area. And I had this like little percentage of Morocco and, you know, a little percentage of other places in the world. Have you heard of this?
Yes.
Yeah. This is probably not the first time you've heard of someone getting a DNA result and having ideas of where they're from, right?
Yes.
A few years later, I got an update. Have you heard of these updates?
I mean, that type of DNA testing isn't the type of DNA testing that the crime lab does.
Have you heard of these kind of updates?
I personally haven't had any experience with that, so.
Okay, my
sorry,
question
no.
is, it's difficult for you, I'm sorry, but have you heard of these kind of updates? Where people get DNA and it tells them from where they're from in the world?
I'd like to make an objection. I can approach if you prefer.
Why don't you approach? Thank you, gentlemen. Please continue.
So you've heard of people getting their DNA tested to tell them where they're from in the world, right?
Yes.
And you've heard of people getting like updates, giving them some differences from what the original perspective was of where they're from this world, right?
I think so. I haven't had personal experience with that, so I don't know. And I don't do that type of testing, so
I guess that's a no.
yeah.
Okay, so no one's ever talked to you about having a DNA test to find out where they're from in the world? No one.
Sorry, could you maybe rephrase that?
Sure. No one has ever talked to you about a DNA test from where they're from in the world. Is that what you're
Yes,
testifying?
I've had people talk to me about that before.
Thank you. And you've heard of some of these results being changed as time has gone on. Isn't that true?
Not in my personal experience, I haven't.
You've never heard of anyone tell you that until me, myself, has now provided that information to you.
Yes.
Wow. No further questions.
All right, any redirect?
Just a couple. You were just asked about DNA testing of the vein of Ancestry.com, 23andMe, and so on. And you stated those are different tests or different type of testing. What's the difference?
Yes, so the testing that the crime lab does is called STR testing. So STR testing stands for short tandem repeats. And these are repeated sequences in your DNA that repeat a variable number of times. And the number of repeats that you have at that location is unique to you. And so our analysis is we are looking at those number of repeats, and that generates your DNA profile. The ancestry type testing is a different type of testing called a SNP testing. And so that is a different type of testing. Our STR testing is in regions of your DNA that don't code for anything. So that information is not going to tell you where you're from. It's not going to tell you how that person looks. It's not going to tell you anything about their medical history. So we're basically analyzing regions in the DNA that are almost like filler regions, like they aren't actually coded for a protein or anything like that.
So we established there are different tests. It's fair to say these two different types of tests look for different things.
They're complete types of tests.
And we talked about the state lab being accredited.
Yes.
You know if 23andMe is certified for legal process?
I don't have personal experience working with anything 23andMe.
You know if it's designed to be used in criminal cases?
Not to my knowledge, I'm not sure.
But your testing is certified and used in criminal cases.
Yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Recross?
Absolutely. All right, Ms. Williams, have you ever participated in training for DNA testing?
Yes.
And what is your training for DNA testing?
So I had on-the-job training, so I completed a whole training program for that. And then I also attend forensic conferences. We talk about DNA testing. And then through my college degree, I took courses about DNA.
And where did you go to college?
I went to Brigham Young University.
And when you went to BYU, did you take coursework in DNA extraction?
So DNA extraction was a topic covered in my class. I didn't have a specific class called DNA extraction, but that was part of our biology curriculum.
Yeah, I didn't ask if you took a class on DNA extraction. I asked if you participated in any DNA extraction at BYU.
Like during a lab course?
Did you go to BYU?
Yes.
Did you participate in any DNA extraction while you're going to BYU?
No.
Okay. Did you have any lab work while you were in your college studies in relation to DNA?
Yes.
And what kind of lab work did you do at BYU for DNA?
So during my biology course and also during my instrumental analysis class, I learned about DNA techniques. And then we also, during my biology course, we learned about different ways to detect DNA.
And what were those ways?
So, for example, one of those was gel electrophoresis, which isn't a method that we use anymore, but that was one of the topics covered.
And was this lab work?
Yes.
Okay. You described earlier RSTR testing, right?
STR testing, yes.
STR testing and SNP testing.
SNP testing is a different type of testing done at the lab. That's for like the 23andMe type of testing.
So you mentioned those, right?
Yes.
Okay. Did you learn about STR testing at your time at BYU?
Yes.
Okay. And did you participate in any lab work on that STR testing at BYU?
No.
When did you first do lab work in relation to your STR testing experience?
I did it when I was hired at the state lab.
And so was it on the job experience at the state lab?
Yes.
Okay. Did you do any SNP testing while you were at BYU?
No.
Did you ever know about SNP testing at BYU?
Yes, I had heard of it.
Have you ever done any studies on it at all, or is this just something you heard through word of mouth?
I'm not trained in SNP testing.
That wasn't my question. Do you remember my question?
I can't remember your exact phrasing.
Okay, my question is did you learn about SNP testing while you were at BYU, or did you just learn about it through word of mouth?
I can't remember exactly, but it was probably just word of mouth.
Okay, and in your coursework at BYU, how many classes did you take that engaged in DNA testing, or DNA, the science of DNA at BYU?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
More than one?
Yes.
More than three? And what I said is, how many classes did you take that had part of DNA?
I can't remember exactly right now.
Maybe 5?
Yeah, maybe about 5.
Okay. And in your studies at BYU, your bachelor's was in biology, is that right?
It was biochemistry.
Biochemistry. Were you ever informed at BYU while you were in biochemistry about the fallibility of DNA, about it sometimes not being perfectly accurate?
Yes.
You had some professors in biochem at BYU, right?
Yes.
And they would inform you as part of your coursework that it's not a perfect science, right?
Yes.
And do you still agree with that?
Yes.
No further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be excused?
Yes, please excuse the witness.
You agree as well, Mr. Facemire?
Yes.
Thank you. You're free to go. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a recess. It's about 3:30. We'll call you back in about 10 or 15 minutes to do our last little sessions for this afternoon. Thank you.
All right, for the jury.
Thank you. Please be seated. Right. Mr. Tabi, Mr. Pomeroy, Mr. Brown, anything we need to put on the record for the state before our break?
How late are we going today, Your Honor?
4:30-ish. If you think it makes sense to break today at this point, you can just twist my arm
She's going to be an hour and 10.
She's right around an hour, hour and 10.
for direct.
Yes, Your Honor.
And so if we can have that extra 5 to 10,
Yeah, I'm
we'd
not
end
going
direct
to
today.
yell at you.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you,
All
Judge.
right. Let's come back then about 22 and be ready to go. Well, a little before that, so we're ready to go right at 22.
Okay.
All right.